We want to welcome you to what I think is going to be an exciting interview today. All of us were captivated. We spent a lot of time in prayer back in October of last year when we found out that a number of missionaries had been kidnapped in Haiti and were being held for a very high ransom. And so we started to pray. I know a lot of you did. And so you are interested in this interview today. And we are excited to have you with us. I'm just going to ask that we start with a word of prayer because we want to lift up the Lord Jesus through all of this. Father, thank you for this time together. Thank you for people who are willing to share their story and to encourage us in our walk with you. Lord, thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, several months ago, Bill, I asked you if maybe we could arrange an interview. And so we thought, well, let's go ahead and let's see what's possible. And you live here in Hart, where one of the families lives that was part of that kidnapping in Haiti. And so you said, hey, I'll see what we can do. And so would you introduce our guest today?
This is Ryder Noecker and his wife, Cheryl and Sherilyn. They are the family that was part of the kidnapping there in Haiti. Okay. The people that we prayed for. I think it's a blessing that they're standing here, or sitting right here in front of us. Yeah. And to me, it's awesome how the Lord works. If we're faithful in what He calls us to, then He's faithful to lead us where we should go today. Yes. So today, I'm overwhelmed, guys. I am that you're home, you're safe. And I look forward to hearing the complete story, because I think right now we know in part, but after today, I think we would know the whole story.
All right. Thanks so much, Bill, for helping us out. And thank you for being here and being willing to share your story. I know that's important to you, as I've gotten to know you a little bit here, just as we've talked this morning, to show God's faithfulness, and that you're willing to share that story as freely as possible. And so we want to go ahead and start. I think, tell us, just to get us started, missions. It's not new to you, nor to your church. Tell us a little bit about your work in Haiti. And I don't know I know we've got some pictures, and so I'm going to let you, Ray, decide how's the best way to move from here on in. I think you maybe have a picture of the orphanage where you were working at this particular time. So I'll let you just kind of move in and help us out in this interview.
Yeah, so whenever I have an opportunity to share, there's two things I want to do. One is just to thank God for what He did for our family there in Haiti, and to appreciate His answers to prayer, and then also to thank God's people, because the Bible tells us that the prayer of the righteous avails much, and we certainly appreciated prayers of local people that we know, our family, our church family, but people all around the world. So yeah, missions has always been close to our heart. We spent 7 years in Kenya, and actually what led us to Haiti, we never really, our heart was always in Kenya, but we had applied to go to Kenya. And when that didn't work out, we were invited to go to Haiti to do discipleship teaching there. And, we really felt like God led us to be there in Haiti during that time. So yeah, that's why we were there. And I had went to do discipleship ministry. CAM, Christian Aid Ministries, was the mission organization we were working with. And they have a program where they bring in 30 to 60 pastors for a 3-week training course. The men are there Monday through Friday, and then they go home on the weekends to their family and churches. We had finished 2 weeks of that when my family was kidnapped. So backing up when...
Now, you were not with them on the day they were kidnapped.
No, I wasn't. I was back at the mission base. I had decided to stay back there because the next Sunday, we were planning to have communion and I was preparing a message for the communion service and also the teaching. I'm a teacher, but just being in a new culture, a new language, a new curriculum, I felt like I needed that time to prepare.
Hey, I fully understand.
So I was not with my family. And through that, we as a family have seen God's leading in that. A couple days earlier, when we were discussing the opportunity to go to the orphanage, which was pretty important for our family, for our children that had went with us, they wanted to go along. My wife wasn't sure that she was going to go, but I remember talking to her on Friday and she said, yeah, I just feel like I need to go. And so God had worked in her heart to make sure that she was there to be with our children who were part of the group that was taken hostage. I was not able to be with them. And there were times throughout that captivity that it was an earnest prayer that God would just open a door that I could go to my family. Other times I felt like God had a work and a purpose for me there at the mission, interacting both with our daughters at home, because we had left 4 of our daughters here in the States, and also just the church family and the mission.
Sure.
So, that's a little bit of where we were at.
Well, why don't you just share some of your pictures with us, and that will help to lead us into the broader story.
Yeah, so I do have some pictures that would introduce the other missionaries that we were serving with there.
Okay.
The slide that's on the screen is actually a couple verses from Psalm 18. And this was the psalm that I read the night that my family was taking hostage. It's a favorite psalm of mine, but if you continue reading down in there, David at some point says, I will cry out to the Lord because he's my salvation. And so certainly through that time, this was a psalm that I often turned to. So the next several slides are pictures. The first one here is of my family, those who were able to go with us. Sherilyn, my oldest daughter, is here with us today, and my wife. And then our 4 youngest children were able to go with us. And we had decided that we wanted, after spending 7 years on the mission field with our older daughters, we had seen how that time had impacted their life and their worldview, really. And we wanted to have a time on the mission field with our younger children. So starting on the right of the picture there is Courtney, and then my oldest son, Brandon. Sheldon is 7. He's sitting up there on the totes, my wife and myself, and then our youngest daughter, Cassandra, and Sherilyn's all the way on the left there. So incidentally, those totes that we so carefully packed, when we got to Chicago, they told us there's an embargo and you can't take boxes or totes to Haiti. So we almost didn't get on our plane in Chicago. We managed to get them to check us through to Miami. And when we got to Miami, we had to buy all new luggage, repack our stuff. But God was faithful, and we were able to make our flight into Haiti. So if we keep moving through, there's the next family is a couple that was there with them in the camp. This would be Ryan and Melody Korver. They had 2 young children. Andre, the boy, was 3, and Laura was 8 months when they were kidnapped, and she was 10 months when they were released or escaped. So the children were a great blessing to the group, gave a lot of interaction. One of the things they had to deal with there was just the time and I think you described the boredom and just the length of time. But having the children there was a blessing for the group, but also it opened doors with the guards because children soften people's hearts. And so they were able to develop a lot of relationships just because of having the children there. Then we had the next couple is Matt and Rachel Miller. So Matt was the accountant there at the mission. Matt and Rachel would have been released on November 20th. So they were the first couple that was released after about 6 weeks of captivity. Matt had developed a an infection in his leg, and it was causing him some heart problems. And so they had appealed to the gang, and the gang agreed to release Matt and Rachel on November 20th. So that was a great blessing to us because we were finally able to get some firsthand information about the life of the group in the camp. Then there were several single folks that were there. Kay Yoder was a single young lady there at the mission helping with housekeeping. And she had went along that day just to spend time at the orphanage. The next are the several young men who served on staff. So Sam Stolzfus was head of their teacher program. Sam spoke very good Creole, and he became the interpreter and kind of liaison between the hostages and the gang. Sam was a dynamic preacher and spent a lot of time preaching both to fellow other hostages and prisoners, as well as the gang members. So at one point, Sam lost his voice from preaching. Then there were a couple other young men. Wes Yoder was the mechanic, and Wes was very instrumental in helping to direct the escape once they agreed as a group. The night or earlier before the escape, he had made a couple trips out into the bush just to kind of scope it out. But God really worked through Wes to kind of help lead the group out that night. Dale Weidman is actually a Canadian. He was actually in charge of the trip to the orphanage. He was the driver, and Dale would have been the only individual that was ever separated from the group by the gang. Otherwise, the group was allowed to be together the whole time. And that was a great blessing and an answer to prayer. We prayed a lot that the group would be able to stay together. The gang had taken Dale and put him in a separate vehicle for just probably about an hour or so when they were making their way from the main highway up to their camp. Austin Smucker, this young man had actually arrived in Haiti less than 24 hours before they were kidnapped. He had came to Haiti. He was going to be overseeing a rebuilding project down on the South Peninsula from the earthquake back in August of last year. So he had just arrived and heard about the trip to the orphanage and said, yeah, I want to go along. And less than 24 hours after he arrived in Haiti, he was taken hostage. So incidentally, Austin Smucker and my daughter Sherilyn have since been engaged. So they're looking forward to being married in July of this year. So
sometimes we have questions about what are some of the long-term effects of being kidnapped. And Sherilyn, anything you'd never met this gentleman before, had you?
No, I did not know who he was.
Yeah, push it till it turns green.
I had never met Austin before, and it took all of those 2 months to get to really know Austin. It was a blessing to me personally to just spend that time in that type of a circumstance. You really get to know people. I mean, you can't for 2 weeks or a week you can put on a facade, but over 2 months of living in close quarters like we were, you get to know someone very well. And Austin and I spent a lot of time talking and just, sharing about our hearts for missions, our families. You have lots of time to talk, and so that's what we did. And both of us like to talk, so we got to know each other very well. And we weren't sure where God would lead us after we got out. When we got out, we had not made any commitments to each other, but we were just waiting for the Lord to show us. And so about a month after we got out, Austin called and asked my dad, and then asked me, and we started dating. And just this past week, he asked me to marry him, and I said yes. So.
Okay, all right. Well, we love those. We love those stories, don't we? So, all right. Well, let's keep going. And the day that we'll let your pictures tell us.
All right. Yes. So I think let's go ahead and see what, oh, yes. So this family is the director and his wife and children. So this was the only folks that were left at the mission. So basically all the staff that was there on our mission had went to the orphanage that day, except myself and Barry and Julia Grant and their children. So we spent the 2 months that my family was in captivity, I spent with Barry and his family there on the base. So this is a picture that was taken several weeks or earlier before the kidnapping. I like to talk about this picture because one, the van there is the one that they were in when they were visited the orphanage. But right the day that the Saturday that they were headed to the orphanage, Dale had pulled this out onto the driveway, and we were just gathered there behind the vehicle waiting for the last of the group to arrive. And when they all got there, we were kind of standing in a circle, just talking about the day. And I thought, you know, I'm not going with my family today. Normally on this type of a trip, I would be going along.
Sure.
And one thing that we do as a family before we leave on a trip is we take time to pray. Usually, you know, the last thing before we leave, everybody's in the vehicle, you know, we've checked, everybody has everything they need. We stop and pray. And I thought, you know, I'm not going to be with them when they leave today. We need to pray. And so we just stood in a circle there behind the van, and everybody held hands and we prayed. And basically, you know, it's just a short prayer asking God to be with us, to protect us, to keep us safe, help us to be a blessing to people, and to keep us safe and to bring us home. And I just remember sharing that prayer. They got in the van and left. I didn't know how God was going to answer that prayer. I knew he would, but I didn't realize it would be 2 weeks or 2 months before I would see all of my family again. Yeah. But I look back on that and other habits that we have established as Christians that are important, that help us through these difficult times. You know, another one, many nights that I was there at home without my family at the mission, I would go into my son's bedroom or my daughter's where they were staying, and I would just reflect on the times that we were together, and I went in there to pray with them at night before they went to bed, and I would stand at their bed and pray for them, even though we weren't physically together. I knew that God was with both of us. So yeah, just those habits that we develop as Christians help us through difficult times in life.
Let me just interrupt. One of the questions that did come up was, were you able to stay in Haiti the whole time? I know sometimes, like in the kidnapping situations, some of the family come back to the States. That way they're safe.
Yeah, so I was able to stay there the whole time.
Okay.
There were a couple times during those 2 months where there was a lot of talk about the rest of the mission staff going back to the States. It was a time of turmoil for Haiti as a country.
Sure.
There was also some other gang activity going on. There was a fuel shortage. So there was a lot of things happening in Haiti besides just the kidnapping. The FBI had assured me that I would be able to stay there as long as I wanted to. I could have stayed there at the embassy or in town.
Sure.
But thankfully, I was able to stay there at the mission, and we were able to continue to interact as a group as well.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
So I think the next picture is of the orphanage that they went to visit that Saturday, and they were able to spend about 2 or 3 hours there interacting with the staff and the children. They ate a light lunch, and they were actually on their way back to Port-au-Prince when the gang stopped them along the road. So the next slide shows the first place that they stayed. They spent about 2.5 weeks here. The first time they were here at this location, and you can kind of see there were 2 houses there. The larger one with the dot on is where the group stayed. But the first 2.5 weeks they were there, they were only able to use half of this building. So all 17 of them, the first night stayed in a room about 10 by 12. And they could hear on the other side of, there was a wall. This room was divided, this house was divided into 2 rooms. On the other side, they could hear another group of hostages. And they came to find that, what was there, 10 or 11 other individuals who were being held hostage by the same gang. They were able to see them briefly, didn't have a lot of interaction with them, but they were able to communicate with them through the wall. And when the group would sing in the evenings, often the other group of hostages would join in. And, you know, as the weeks progressed, my wife shared, at one point she was in their room during the day. And as she was laying there just trying to rest, she heard a couple of the other hostages in the other room start singing. And they were singing in Spanish. So she really didn't know what song they were singing, but it just really encouraged her and blessed her that here there were other people going through this experience, and they were able to encourage one another through song and prayer.
Okay, let me just interrupt. Cheryl, I know you've heard this story. You've lived this story many times. And, but when you hear your husband talk about this building and this 10 by 12 room and the kidnapping, what does it do to your spirit? I mean, what kind of feelings come up inside you? Is that a fair question?
It's a fair question. I understand. Lots of thoughts. Thoughts of being hot, thoughts of being kind of miserable at times. But on the other hand, memories of God working, you know, just lifting your spirits, encouraging you. Yeah, we faced a lot in that room. There was nights that we would lay there so hot we couldn't sleep, and we would fan the children to keep them so that they could sleep. So yeah, this building, of course, find out that we come back here and we have more room, but there's lots of memories there. And you know, I have memories of laying there asking God, where are you? Looking at that rusty roof saying, God, have you forsaken us? And, you know, there was one day that I came to the point where I had sores all over and I was a pretty miserable mess. And I laid on the bed and I just cried out to God and I said, God, when I came to Haiti, I told people that if you would take us to Haiti, you would take care of us. And, you know, I'm thinking, here I am in gangster camp. That didn't look like God taking care of me. But he said, do you still believe that? And that made me think. I had to remember that, yeah, he was still taking care of me, even if I wasn't gangster camp. So, yeah, that place brings back lots of good memories, lots of difficult memories, but God was faithful.
Sorry, go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, so they spent about 2.5 weeks here, and during that time, like I said, they were able to interact with the other group of hostages and with their guards. But then one night they were moved, and the second location actually was a blessing to them right in the middle. They spent about 2 weeks at this location. So actually they stayed in the compound kind of towards the top middle of this picture. And around it is a farming community and also a bunch of trees. And while they were there, one of the blessings was that these were mango and coconut trees. So during the time they were there, they were able to get a lot of fresh fruit. So that kind of supplemented their diet, which up to that point had been basically 2 meals a day. Shinlin, why don't you tell us a little bit what those meals were like?
Well, in the morning, the gang would bring us breakfast anywhere from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it was mostly just spaghetti It kind of had a fishy oil on it, so it was kind of oily. It had a good flavor most generally, but it did get tiring after a while, just plain spaghetti. And they would bring us some hard-boiled eggs as well, which we could maybe have like a half of a hard-boiled egg per person. And then supper came anywhere from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 8 in the evening. And that was mostly rice and beans with a little bit of fish sauce or chicken sauce. And then, they did change it up a few times for us. We did get beans, like a bean soup one time, a couple of times. And a couple of times they did bring us scrambled eggs. That was another big blessing, something that we even prayed for some of the time when we wanted to know that God was still hearing. Sometimes we would just ask for little things, like, God, could you please bring us scrambled eggs for breakfast, or something cold to drink, or just little things. And God was faithful. He did answer those, maybe not right away, but maybe 2 days later, he would bring those things for us. And it was just an encouragement to our faith, knowing that even though it seemed like he wasn't hearing our prayer for deliverance, he was hearing us because he was answering those small requests. And so it was just a boost for our faith, and we were just very thankful for that.
Great.
Yeah, I think it was my 15-year-old son who asked for scrambled eggs. He was tired of spaghetti for breakfast.
Yeah.
But also I think of those young men, those who had went onto the mission field as young men to serve the Lord. And they were dynamic young men, and they were used to being in control of their life, whether they were in charge of the mechanic shop or the warehouse or and now all of a sudden here they are confined to one room or one compound for 2.5 weeks with nothing to do. So, after a while you do think, man, I just wish I'd have a cold Coke,
Yeah.
and God would hear and answer that prayer.
Praise the Lord.
Encourage them.
Yeah.
So a couple things that were a blessing about back at the second place, being a farming community, they were able to see a lot more of the native people besides just their guards. So there was a larger community here down at the bottom of the picture, and a lot of those folks were farmers, and they would pass by where they were being held. So they were able, even though it was very distant, they were able to develop some interaction with those community people. A couple events that took place there. They got to know this young goat herder that was always taking his goats past, and they thought, well, maybe he can help us, get a phone. And so finally they, seen an opportunity. And one of them went up to this young boy and asked him if he could get them a phone so they could try to contact the mission or somebody to get help. And then this little boy, he went over and asked one of the guards to borrow his phone. So that didn't work out so well for them. But at least, it was just a little interaction there and gave him something to laugh about. But yeah, so it was nice there. They were able to get some fresh fruit and a little bit more interaction with the people, which was very important to them. And then they were moved back to the first location again for the rest of their time. And when they were moved back, like I said, they were able to use the whole, both rooms in that house. There were some other improvements that you don't see here, a small shower room. But yeah, so they would have spent the rest of their time here, and this is the place that they eventually escaped from.
Do you know if the authorities, the people that were doing the negotiations, if they knew where you were all located?
Yes, they did. We actually just talked to one of the men who was in Haiti with the FBI just this past week. But yeah, within about a week of them being taken captive, they were able to identify where they were staying. And they did fly daily surveillance flights over these areas as well, so that they could keep track of how the group was being taken care of. Yeah, so when they moved them, they were able to find the new location based on, you know, the fact that they had some solar panels. And when they moved the group, they moved the solar panels. So yeah, they were able to keep track of them. So yeah, that next slide there is just a hand-drawn picture. Has a little bit more detail. The room that they stayed in, if I had a pointer, but anyway, down in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see there's a door there that has a prop and what looks like a stone against the bottom. So the house where the pointer's at right now, that house was never used, the lower house. And just, they called that the devil's house, and nobody used that house the whole time they were there. They were always in that other.
So you were talking about the upper house with that door down to the
Yep.
lower left there?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah,
So
just
that-
over to the left a little bit farther. Yeah, okay.
That would have been the door that they eventually made their escape from. That was being held shut by about a 1.5 foot diameter chunk of concrete or rock and a prop. And so they were able, the night of their escape, to use a stick and push that stone away, and then eventually the prop as well. And that's how they escaped. So the next picture, I think, is an overview of that, of what is called Quadabuque. The red pointer down there at the bottom of the screen would show the location of the camp. And then maybe I can just stand up.
Yeah, sure.
So right up here at the top, this is Route 3. And right up here, there's a sand mine. And when they were in their camp down here, they were able to see this sand mine, and they knew that if they got up to that point, they would be out of gang territory. So the night that they walked out, they kind of started down here and headed north, encountered the shore of this lake here, had to skirt around the edge of it, and then eventually headed up into that area. So
We're talking a distance of,
well, we were able to, if you measure it, as the crow flies, it's 5.5 miles. So we estimate they probably walked 7 to 8 miles that night. So yeah, that's kind of the first part
to
of
work off those rice and beans.
Yeah, the first part of the trip would have been through mostly like farming. So there were a lot of paths that they followed. Shirley, why don't you tell us a little bit about that trip out of there that night?
Well, Bill mentioned that to walk off the rice and beans, but unfortunately, most of the time, they didn't bring us a big amount of food. We had enough. We never starved, but at times that was another thing we prayed for, was that they would bring us extra food, because they never seemed to get the fact or figure out how much we needed. So sometimes they would bring us an overabundance, sometimes they wouldn't bring us enough. Most of the time it was less than what we could have eaten. And of course, with all those guys in there, they were always hungry, and some of them were hungry all the time. So anyway, but yeah, that night that we were that we escaped, it was just a night that was full of miracles. There was a couple miracles that God did leading up to there. The first big miracle that God did for us was just uniting our group in the discussion of escape. We had discussed escaping many times, but as a group, we just there's just different times it was different people were not comfortable with it. We just couldn't all seem to agree on whether we should do it, how we should do it, and when. And so we had kind of decided that was something that we needed to do as a group when we all felt comfortable. And so when we weren't all agreed, we just scrapped the idea again. So up until the day we escaped, we still were not united in that fact. And a couple small miracles that we didn't know at the time were miracles that God did. A couple nights before we escaped, it rained very hard, and the courtyard between the two buildings flooded. And in that courtyard, they had a structure made out of some sticks. And on that, they had strung a power strip. And the guards used that to plug their phones in at night when the generator was running. And so that power strip was right outside the door where we would have escaped. And so at night, the guards spent a lot of time around that door. So it would have been impossible. But when it flooded in there, that power strip was underwater. And so the guards moved it to the porch area, which is on the opposite side of the house. So now at night, then they began to spend more time on the opposite side of the house, leaving that courtyard empty. We didn't really think about it at the time, but later on we realized what a miracle that was. And it was just the beginning of a series of miracles. So then the next one was the day that we escaped. Ryan, the father of the two children in there, came to the group at our 1 o'clock prayer time. We had set up 3 times to pray a day, morning and then at 1 o'clock and then in the evening. And at 1 o'clock, our prayer was specifically directed towards our deliverance. We just prayed directly for deliverance at that time. So at 1 o'clock, he came to the group and he said that morning he had been praying and he just felt like God was telling him, now is the time. You need to take your family out of here. So he shared that with the group and asked us to share what we felt, but he felt like God wanted him to take his family out that night, to try that night to escape. So we went around as a group and it just seemed like God gave us all peace about it. Everybody felt like God had now given some direction for us. And so we were like, yes, let's start planning. So we decided we weren't going to do too much. We were just kind of going to let it up to God, not try to tell him how to do it, just kind of let things go and, just follow the Lord's leading. So we did make a few preparations, packed our bags, discussed who would go first, made a lineup, and also just one of the guys stuck a stick inside to use as the pry bar to push the rock out of the way. And so then that night we went to bed, and we had decided at 1 o'clock in the morning we would get up and try to escape. So at 1 o'clock we woke up and the guys started trying to move things around. They pushed the rock out of the way and it rolled just a little ways and fell into a little drainage ditch there. And then after that, my brother, there was a strip of wood that was kind of covering up the hole in the door. So my brother went to remove that, and when he pulled it off, it kind of made a popping noise. And so, we kind of all froze. And then my sister knelt down to look out just to make sure that no guards had gone into the toilet house, which would have been right beside where we
Carlos, maybe you can back up to the picture of that hand-drawn trail right there.
So the outhouse was right close to, you can kind of see the bushes look kind of faded there in the center, right above the outhouse, and they were lower there, the bushes were, so we had determined.
Let me just say, we may have some young people watching who don't know what an outhouse is.
Well, this one was even more of an outhouse than in the States.
Was this a 1 or 2-seater?
Not even.
Oh,
it didn't
not
have
even.
a
One-holer.
Yeah, it's a one-holer.
For those of you that are watching and don't know what an outhouse and never had the privilege to use one, it's a restroom that's outside the house in a little shed or a lean-to or something, and that's where you go to the bathroom.
And this one was not a building. It was just a few pieces of plastic on some sticks. And
then very holy, you kind of took your friend along with you to cover up the holes and
to be the lock.
Yeah, and to be the lock for the door. It had no back wall, so
and you couldn't even knock. It's just a sheet.
Yeah, so it was quite an interesting experience. So we didn't want any guards to go in there while we weren't watching, and then as we would have to pass by that as we went into the bushes, so we didn't want to get a surprise of having somebody in there that we weren't expecting. So when she looked out of the little hole, she immediately saw that our head guard was standing at the corner of the house, right by the door, and he was looking directly at the door and the rock. And at this point, the rock was moved. And so earlier on in our stay there, we had tried to unbar that door just to get some ventilation through there. And the guards had threw a tremendous fit and told us we were never allowed to open that door again. And so when she saw him looking at the rock, she got back up and she said, our guard is there, and he's looking at the rock. What are we going to do? So everybody we put the beds back down and everybody went and laid back down so that if he did come inside, we would look like we were still sleeping. And then we laid there for maybe a half an hour, nothing happened. To this day, we do not know what the guard saw, but to me and to many in our group, we realized that it was another miracle. God either blinded his eyes, he didn't see it, or we don't know what he saw, but he did not do anything. He didn't move the rock, he didn't say anything. He did go back out front and we heard him starting to wake up some of the guards, so they were, you could hear them moving around more. And so we just laid there for a while, and after a bit, we had determined that if we weren't out by 3 o'clock, it would be too late to make it far enough away in the night hours that we had left. So about 2:30, some of our group were like, well, are we going to still go? Others of the group were like, well, they had already thought, maybe this was God saying that, we shouldn't go. And the rest of our group were like, no, it seems like this is another miracle God has performed. Let's try the next thing. So at about 2:30, the guys once again started working on barring the door. So they stuck the stick out again and lifted up the post that was against the door till they were able to, Wes was able to slip out the door. He went around the corner and those 2 water barrels are there, and there's a shower house right there on the corner. You can't see it. It would be hidden by the roof. And so he crept in there and looked out around the corner just to see where all the guards were and see if the way was clear. There was a few guards sitting in those chairs up there, but he came back saying that it was clear. They would not be able to see us as we were walking. And within less than a minute after he came back, we were out the door and into the bushes. It was just so fast. And the 2 men in the back put the door back in place, the rock and the post back in place, and left it like that. So the guards would not know that we were gone until they came to check on us in the morning. Once we were in the bushes, we just went through the bushes a little ways, and then there's a canal that runs down along there. We walked along the canal for a ways until we decided it was time to cross, so we crossed it. Well, that was kind of an adventure. Many of us got muddy, but we were finally across the canal and headed for the spot that Dad pointed out on the map. And so we spent the rest of the night just hiking out. There was nothing like it. I've never experienced anything like that. Just the feeling of God's presence and just his direction. There was so many miracles that he had already performed that I never felt scared that entire night. It was just a feeling of joy and rejoicing. I just wanted to sing and just shout because God had done so many miracles for us. And so that hike was just an amazing time. It was difficult. It was not easy. But we had never prayed that it would be easy. We just asked that God would direct us. Sometimes we wondered what he was doing and whether his directions were quite accurate. But he did make a path for us all the way. At one point, close to the morning when the moon was going down, soon after we had rounded the lake, we got into a briar patch, and we spent maybe an hour and a half of the darkest part of the night in that briar patch just trying to get out. And at that point, there was times when we wondered what God was doing and why he had led us here. But every time when we didn't know where we were supposed to go, we would stop. we would gather around as a group and we would pray for direction. And it seemed like after we prayed, God would always give the person that was in the front direction. And we would start off again and we'd be able to go for a while again. And we prayed that we would never meet anybody that would not be helpful to our journey. We never met anybody until the next morning when they found somebody to help them find a phone to call. And there was just so many miracles. And the one thing about that briar patch, it was so thick and dense at times. There was no way. You just looked around and you just saw a wall of briars. And we pray and we're like, God, where's the path? We asked for a path. We didn't ask for it to be easy. We didn't ask for a big one, but there's no path here. And yet, the next morning, as we came out of that briar patch in the light of the morning, and I looked at my arms and looked at the other people in the group. And that night, it just seemed like we were going through a meat grinder, constantly scraping against the briars. And yet, when I looked at my body and other people in our group, we didn't look that bad. And it hit me. God did give us a path. Maybe it wasn't a 2-foot path that I thought he should have given us, but he gave us a teeny path to squeeze through somehow, some way. And so even there, he was providing. God doesn't always do it the way we think he should, but he does answer our prayers. And we saw that throughout our entire time there in captivity. And then the next morning, he gave us the most beautiful sunrise I have ever seen. Just as we were headed up into the foothills, we looked back over the valley, the sun's coming up, just looking from where we came from and where what we had gone through that night, and just rejoicing in God's grace and strength. And it was just an amazing feeling and a blessing for all of us in our group.
So for you and your mom, when did you feel we're free?
Well, actually, my experience was a little different because I was released 10 days before they escaped. And that in itself was God's leading because, as I said, I had sores on my body. My strength I was pretty weak. In fact, it took me a week to be able to walk any length of distance. And so I would have never been able to walk out with them. And the fact that God gave them the endurance was amazing. But yeah, I had a totally different experience because the gang came and took me out along with other single lady. And that was on December 5th. They came and, they kind of told us that we were leaving, but they had kind of left on that the whole group was leaving. And I was trying to decide, they were talking about releasing me to get medical help. And I was like, well, do I leave my family behind? What do I do? And so I had just told her that day that I was going to tell them that I wouldn't leave unless my whole family went. And she said, no, if they're going to take you, you need to go because you need medical help. And so I was still praying about what I should do. Well, God answered the prayer because I didn't have a choice. They just came and took us. And my 6-year-old son was with me, and the whole entire time he was by my side. There was a few times he would go off and play, but if anything scary happened, he was right there. And so at this particular time, he was right there, and they were trying to separate him from me, and because they were not going to let him go with me. And so it was a bit of a struggle, but I told him that if he doesn't go, I don't go. And so then in the end, they left him go with me. And so we were taken out and turned over to a white priest that took us to the U.S. Embassy and where I met Ray. So that was a very joyful time for us.
For sure.
So
For sure.
I'll let her share when she felt she was free.
I would say probably as soon as we entered the bushes, and we're hidden from view of camp, I mean, after that, the night was just a fun walk in the dark. I mean, it wasn't always fun, but there was so much joy in my heart. And I did not feel at any time like God had just done so many miracles to get us to that point that I was like, why would he now send us back? And so I was not afraid all of that night as we hiked out. There was very little fear that night. And it was just a time of rejoicing in the work that the Lord had done.
Well, praise the Lord. Praise the Lord.
So the feelings maybe were a little different than the reality, because they knew that until they got up to that Route 3, they were in gang territory. So they didn't want to meet people.
Mhm.
They didn't. At one point in their hike, they came up to this village and they said, we don't want to go through the village because we don't want to wake up the dogs or the people. So they had tried to go around the village, ran into a dead end, prayed and felt like God was saying, no, you need to go through the village. So they turned around and went through the village. No dogs woke up, no people came out.
And that's in a country like Haiti.
Yeah.
That's strange.
Yeah,
Not to have the dogs come out.
Yeah,
Because
'cause
dogs are
they're-
everywhere.
all night long you hear
Oh,
dogs
yes,
barking.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, even at the beginning of the very first house we passed, the dogs started barking, and so that's Haiti. Dogs are everywhere. So the fact that we never heard that first dog barking was the only dog that barked the entire time. We never met any people, not a soul, until the next morning. And that in itself was an amazing thing. Another way God directed us, after that morning when we came out of the briar patch, the first thing we came to was a small road. And at this point, we still didn't want to meet anyone. We knew we were still in gang territory. So we started hiking up the road a little ways, and they had passed the message back the line that if, in fact, somebody came, we needed to hide. And I looked around and I'm like, hide where? There's no vegetation. Haiti is not it does not have much vegetation, and vegetation that is there is briar. So I'm like, the only thing is a few briar bushes, and I've already spent the night in a briar bush. I do not want to get in another one. And so I was like, God, please don't let anybody come along. And we were on that road a couple minutes, and the mother was carrying her baby, and she tripped and fell very hard, and the baby started crying loudly. And so we knew we had to get off the road. So the person in the front said, here's a path, let's take it. So the path was headed back in the direction that we were supposed to be going. We spent the rest of the morning just following those cow paths. But after we turned on that path, we were only on there like 5 minutes out of sight of the road. And we heard 2 vehicles go by on that road. And it just seemed like, we didn't know who those vehicles were, but we did not want to meet people at that point. So it just seemed like God can use whatever circumstances. He can use the difficult things that we go through in our lives to direct us. And he used that difficult thing of a mother falling with her child to direct us, And so, difficult things are not fun, but if we allow them, God can use them for good.
That's good. Thank you.
My son describes it as a Red Sea experience. Literally, God parted the way for them and led them. But he also kept other people from seeing them until, like she said, they got to close to the road, and they sent a couple of the young men to find somebody with a phone. Found somebody that was willing to get them a phone. They were able to call back to the base, and the director there, Barry Grant, and another supervisor who had come down the Sunday after the kidnapping, actually went and picked him up. And I think I got a couple of pictures of them being picked up. If you scroll through there, the next slide is them walking down the road. So there you can kind of see those hills in the background that they were headed for that night. And this road is Route 3. And they had stopped just up on one of those foothills to wait for the director to come. It took about 45 minutes from the time he got the call until he got to this place. and here they are walking down to meet him. So yeah, that's a very, very exciting picture. A lot of smiles there. And then I think the next ones show us back at the camp, rejoicing there. We spent about a half an hour just singing and praying and just worshiping God back at the camp. So this is the group of all the 11 that were still in the camp that hiked out, and then my wife and Kay and Sheldon, 12. Yeah, that's right. So there were 15 of the group there in Haiti on December 16th. So this was about 10 o'clock in the morning. We wanted to get a group picture before folks headed back to get ready. They had decided that we were going to leave that afternoon. And so, yeah, we just took a quick picture there. I think the next picture is of the plane. So we headed from the mission, which is about 15 minutes from Port-au-Prince, into the airport. The Coast Guard had flown this C-130 in to take us back to Miami. So the police there would have been an escort that the embassy had sent out to kind of escort us from the mission back into the airport.
Carlos, can you go back to the last picture? So just to make a little bit of mention from this picture, we spent 2 months in camp, and us ladies wore the same clothes the entire time we were in camp. We would wash our clothes and put them back on wet and try and get them dry before the night. But, and as you can see, the guys had no shave for 2 months. And so they got a little scruffy. It wasn't bad until their mustaches started growing into their mouth. But
they did at one point find a straight razor, and some of them tried to use, what was it? A bottle cap and the straight razor to try to trim their, because they didn't have a scissors, they didn't have a razor, they had nothing, and they just found this straight razor on the ground, and we're trying to use it to trim. So yeah.
So yeah, our days were quite interesting in that way. We really didn't have much to do all day, but we did take showers. We got water out of those barrels and took into the shower a bucket at a time and showered. And for me and my girls, it was easy because we could pass our clothes out. They could wash it while we took a shower, and vice versa. We just trade off. That worked well. For the guys, the gang had brought in a bag of clothes. And so the first week we were there, and so the guys had gone through and each found something that they could put on after they, so that they could change and get their clothes washed and dry, because jeans don't dry very quickly. And so the guards had put up a clothesline for us, so we were able to hang our clothes out. I think originally the gang was planning to do all our laundry and everything, but they found out we weren't totally incapable of doing things as much as they thought. They didn't like us doing too much of anything. My son tried to climb the coconut tree to get coconuts, because boys like to climb trees. Well, they cocked their gun and told him he better get down. Or
They didn't want him to get hurt, but they were gonna, if you don't get down, we're gonna shoot you. They never really threatened them to where they felt like they were in. Maybe the first couple days they really didn't know what was going to happen, but after that, the gang would often cock their gun, but they just as a threat, a show of power. But there's some really funny stories that go along with this, because at one point when they were back at the first place, the second time, there were a couple other prisoners who were not hostages. They were actual gang members who were being held as prisoners. And the gang was cleaning their house there, and some of the gang members were inside doing the cleaning, and the head guard had to go into town to buy some bleach. That's what they were using for cleaning. And so he took these two prisoners and brought them over and set them down in front of the hostages. And he told the prisoners, he said, "Now I'm leaving, but these guys are going to guard you." And don't try to run away, because if you do, they'll shoot you. Seriously, that's what he told me. And then he left. So now we have the hostages sitting there, and the
Smiling
prison,
at
the
us.
prisoners, they don't have a gun, obviously. But yeah, the gang was they never really felt in danger or
Sure.
threatened. There were a lot of evenings were difficult. There was a lot of evenings were difficult.
Satanic practices,
Hmm.
a lot of evil at night. You could feel the darkness. It was very thick. And that's where, it's wonderful to serve a powerful God.
Hmm.
And that's one thing that we had to remember the whole time we were there is, Satan is a powerful enemy, but we serve a God who's
Praise
greater.
God. Praise God.
And that was what carried us through, because
Wonderful.
we knew that no matter what Satan tried to do, God was able
Sure.
to defeat all those plans.
Sure.
Yeah, so they felt more danger and threat from just the spiritual aspect, because there was voodoo practices going on while they were there. One of the men who actually the man who brought their food every day seemed to be like their witch doctor, and every evening he had a bottle that was sitting outside there by a tree, and every evening he would come and take the lid off that bottle, and then in the morning he would come back and he would put the lid on the bottle. And so they had kind of observed this but didn't really know what it was all about. Then one morning when Sam was out having his morning prayer, that man, when he put the lid on the bottle, he said, "Now don't you touch this. This is Satan's bottle. If you touch it, it'll bite you." So they like, okay, now, it was like he was making a point that this is Satan's bottle, don't touch it. It was a voodoo charm is what it was. So the guys talked about it, and they decided that they were going to destroy this. And so they had prayed over it, and one of them picked it up and threw it out into the bushes. And no more was said about it until that night when the man came to open it and it wasn't there. And then at that point, they were having their evening worship service. They were singing and praying. And they saw the man go to find the bottle, and it wasn't there. And so he came over, and he just stood there by their group, waiting for a break in the singing. And they didn't give him any break. They just kept singing. I mean, that night they sang every song they could think of, and some of them they sang twice. But eventually, he stopped and he said, "Where is the bottle?" And they're like, "Well, we don't know where it's at," because they just, we don't have it. So yeah, that evening there was a lot of threats, a lot of shouting, a lot of spiritual darkness. But like Cheryl said, a lot of prayer and a lot of peace too, because we know our God is more powerful. And put on the armor of God and stand. That's what they did.
Sure.
So yeah.
And God was victorious that night.
Yes.
It was a tough night, but at the end of the night, there was peace. They left us alone. We never told them where the bottle was. And just as we faced each other, him shouting, "Where's the bottle?" and us, calmly saying we don't have it, or he'd be telling us, "Give it to me. I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to kill you." And then he would come at them. Sam, like Dad said, was our interpreter and the mediator kind of between the group and the gang, because he knew Creole. And so anytime something happened, they put all of their, focus on him. And so, anytime something like that would happen, they would focus on him and threaten him. And so as he stood there facing them and they're threatening him, the guys, the guys kind of stood around Sam. And, Mackinson would walk towards Sam, threatening him, and the men would just step closer to him and pray and rebuke Satan. And Mackinson would stop and back up, and it just kept doing that, as he would, get courage and come towards Sam. rebuke Satan, pray, and, he would back off. And it was just that continual for a while until finally, we were able to make it inside. And we spent much time praying until we just felt peace and were able to then go to sleep and sleep the night, the rest of the night.
Great. Well, I'm going to transition just a little bit. Well, one of the questions that came from this group was, did you ever think of the possibility of this happening?
So my wife would have shared that as we were preparing to go to Haiti, there were people that would come up to her and say, is it really safe to take a family to Haiti? And, I had people ask me because, Haiti at that point had I think it's a level 4, do not travel, embassy alert. And yet there were regularly church groups going down there, missionaries were there full time. So it's kind of that understanding. Yeah, it's a dangerous place, but we go to dangerous places to serve people, right? When we went down there on the plane we were on, there was another missions group and they were going somewhere to serve. But people would ask, is it safe to take a family there? And where was I going? Oh, did we expect this to happen? No, we didn't.
Oh, the possibility.
Yeah, the possibility. We didn't really expect it to happen. That morning when they left there, that was the furthest thing from their mind. But we were aware that, those things existed.
Sure.
Even on the way to the orphanage that morning, they passed some burning tires that was left over from a roadblock the night before. And so the mission had kind of developed if you come up to an active roadblock where there's actually people there maintaining the roadblock and they're stopping traffic, don't try to go through it. But if it's an old one, because roadblocks are a way of life for the Haitian people. So was it a possibility? Kind of in the back of your mind, it was, but you never expected it to happen.
Well, and somebody a number of years ago said that there are 1,500 at that time, 1,500 relief organizations working in Haiti with the population about the size of Indiana. And so there's a lot of mission activity that goes on. And also, for example, many places in the world where our missionaries have gone, it's not really safe. I remember traveling in Nigeria and we were headed, I forget where we were, back to the airport or something. We had a native driver and we came up on a truck that was on its side burning. In America, we would stop, but not there. The native driver said, "We will not stop here. It's not safe." And because you don't know so it's not quite the same in other countries as it is here. Ray, Bill, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Ray, and do you have any questions that you would like to ask? I know that you've been here, and
I guess my question is, we know Scripture when we're taught that when your faith is put to the test, it causes your endurance to grow. So I guess that would be my question: is how has God grown your endurance through an experience like what you've been through?
Okay.
Yeah, well, to me, one of the lessons I learned while I was there in Haiti was about faith. I think it was the second Sunday after my family was taken hostage. A lot of people would ask me, "How are you doing? How are you doing?" And I answered that question very honestly. I'm doing well in the Lord, or by the grace of God, I'm doing well, because there were a lot of people that were praying for me. We were praying as a group, and I just really felt like I could trust God. Like He was in control. He had allowed this to happen, and He was going to see them through. But that Sunday afternoon, I was walking across, and by the way, we spent a lot of time praying for their faith too, because we felt like we knew they didn't have a Bible with them, and we were reading the scriptures and we were singing. So we were praying that their faith would remain strong, because, you know, discouragement and whatever else, we didn't want that to set in. So heading across the compound, I don't know, it was a temptation from the devil, really, because I started thinking, you know what, these are just words I'm saying. You know, this is just my coping mechanism. What else am I going to say? You know, somebody asked me how I'm doing. What am I going to say? You know, and these are the thoughts going through my mind. And I'm like, wait a minute. No, I do believe, you know, and it was like, so I was wrestling there. Is this faith? Is this a coping mechanism? Is it just words? Do I really believe that God is going to take care of my family? And as I started having those thoughts, I'm like, God, I need to believe. I need to hold on to my faith, because if I begin to doubt, what about my family? And so I remember going back to my room that afternoon and opening up my Bible and turning to the book of James, which I know is a chapter about faith, and beginning to read. And God just spoke to me so many different ways through that. But, you know, one is that, you know, faith is made up of actions. You know, it's made up of little choices. It is what we believe, but it's more than just what we believe. It's acting on that belief. And you know, those are in little choices. So to me, you know, it's just that assurance and knowing that the God, you know, that I believe in, the God of the Bible, the promises of God are true, but I still have to choose. Faith is made up of choices. It's not just a belief, it's an action too. That's you know, for me, that was.
What about the Noecker family going forward? Missions?
Definitely.
We feel like God, we would like to serve on the missions. Right now, I feel like this is my mission right here in Hart. But yes, we would like to continue to serve God wherever He calls us to.
Sure.
Our heart was, as I had said earlier, in Kenya. We'd served there for 7 years, but now our heart is, you know, in Haiti as well.
Sure.
So, you know, but God can really call us wherever He needs us.
Sure. Sherilyn, you're looking forward to a marriage here, Lord willing, before too long. Missions?
Yes, we've discussed it. We're willing to go wherever God calls us. I guess this experience for me just strengthened. I mean, I already knew this, but it just showed me beyond a shadow of a doubt that wherever, if you are in God's will and you're doing what you feel God wants you to do, it doesn't matter what difficult things you will go through difficult things. That's just a part of life. But if you're following God's will and you're where He wants you, He'll give you the grace, and He only gives you that grace when you need it. You know, if I think about going through a difficult time, persecution, whatever my fears are, if I think about having to go through those, it seems impossible for me to do that. But when you go through that, that's when God gives you the grace to do it, not before. And so, you know, if we believed we were supposed to be in Haiti. I mean, God had worked out so many things to take us to Haiti. We weren't planning to go to Haiti, and yet we felt that's where God had directed us. And so when we were kidnapped, it was like, I felt like, no, we're here because God wanted us. So we're here in gangster camp because God wants us here. Maybe we can't see why, but we're not outside of God's will here. Sure. You know, it's not like this was something that surprised God or not, you know. And so, you know, and just watching God work in my life through that, you know, I have been praying that God would work in my life somehow, some way, show me that He cared enough about my life to do something powerful in my life, to show me that, you know, I was important to Him. And he did that through that experience. And just the many miracles I saw him perform just strengthened my faith. You know, the verse in the Bible said, God will supply all your needs. He proved that time and again there. And I would say for me personally, as I look back on that experience, I felt like that was a spiritual mountaintop experience. You know, just I've never felt so close to God as I did there in camp, as we prayed every single day for everything. I mean, we had nothing. So anything we needed, we had to pray for, because we'd ask the gang members, they weren't wanting to get it for us. And so my mom got sick in the first week we were there, deathly sick. I mean, we thought she was dying. She thought she was dying. We had to pray. There was nothing. We had no medicines, nothing. And we prayed and God healed her. And she was back up on her feet with no medication. And then later on, you know, other people in our group got sick and we prayed for them. One night, my brother woke up in the middle of the night. His body was burning up with fever. You could just feel the heat coming off his body. And once again, we had nothing. So we, my mom and I and Austin gathered around him and just started praying. And in 5 minutes, we just could feel the heat leaving his body just as we were praying, you know, and just by the time we were finished praying, his body was down to normal temperature. I've never seen God work that fast. And it was just like, wow, God really can do these miracles. He still does work like he did in the Bible. And so he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so yes, I'm willing to go anywhere. In fact, I would much prefer living on a mission field than living in the United States.
Sure. That's great. That's great. Well, I just want to say thank you for coming and sharing your experiences with us. This has been challenging to me. I love these stories about how God works in powerful ways. I've spent my life, you know, just wanting to let people know about God's power and his ministry. And thank you so much for coming and sharing it with a bigger audience. And I want to thank you, those that are watching online. I just want to thank you for just tuning in or listening to this podcast, however you happen to find it. And I trust you are encouraged, and may God bless you as you continue to trust him and his faithfulness. God bless you.
Yes, thank you for praying, each one of you, and continue to pray, because God hears and answers our prayers.
Yeah. All right. Good.
And
Thank
he
you.
still needs prayer.
It sure does. There's no question about that. Yep. All right. Thank you so much. God bless you.